Hi, I'm Susan Applin, one of the co-CEOs at the World Trade Center Institute. I'm excited to be here today with Bruce McIndoe, a recognized leader and pioneer in risk, security, and intelligence. Bruce is a longtime friend of mine and a partner of my organization, the World Trade Center Institute. Today, I will be talking to Bruce about global megatrends and geopolitical issues that leaders need to be aware of and navigate for their global businesses to thrive. Welcome, Bruce.
Thank you, Susan. Look forward to it.
We have many topics here today to cover, so let's jump right in.
Sure.
As an expert in assessing and mitigating risk, how do you think the growth of artificial intelligence and machine learning impacts global businesses?
Okay, so now you start with the big one, right?
Yes.
We could spend the whole session on just that topic. So let me take this that's the whole technology kind of domain, right? And so when we look at mega trends and the impact that it has on the world and business, we look at five of those domains. So technology, population, right? Demographics, climate change, resource scarcity, and so these are kind of the main topics that we want to talk through. So when you look at technology, the pace of technological change is, just off the charts. And as I always say, science fiction writers are going to have to be a lot more creative, because in the next years, we're going to be, having flying cars and all kinds of wonderful things. But the overall answer to your question around, kind of AI and machine learning, I'm going to retool that as robotics and AI. Because if you take robotics and AI, those are going to have just unbelievable and massive impacts on business in a few years to, a decade ahead, where entire categories of jobs are going to disappear. So any kind of repetitive job or any job that's algorithmic, right, are going to go away. But new jobs are going to appear and new things are going to happen. So companies in deploying that technology, which is going to be huge, also means they're going to have to redeploy people. So those are just some of the things that I would say around AI.
And so I continue to see articles and concern with global CEOs on reskilling and the talent pool that they have. And do you see that as one of the big strategies and areas of concern?
Yeah, 100%, because, as I say, we talk about people as being a critical asset. It's even, demonstrated to be more so in the last 2 years and will be into the future. Companies need to have a mentality of when they hire somebody, they need to hire the right person, because that person needs to grow and morph and adapt to your company needs over their career, which means don't focus so much on a degree or some discipline, but somebody that can be a continuous learner. And think about certification as they move from one job category to another as that need arises. That should be the mentality for companies.
Thank you. And as a result of these mega trends, the world is projecting hyper urbanization. Does the rise in remote working tools adopted during the pandemic change this trend at all? And what is hyper urbanization?
So if you go back to my five, mega trends, so we'll talk about demographics, right? So we're going to add 2 billion people to this planet in the next 30 years, right? And in order to do that, we have to put them somewhere, right? And so when we need to house 2 billion people, that's roughly, just on a rough order of magnitude, 1 billion housing units. If we also look at climate change and other issues that destroy housing units, in the next 40 years, we could have to build 2 billion housing units. Well, in the world today, there's only roughly 2.2 billion housing units. So think about rebuilding everything that's on this planet again in the next 40 years. That's why the only way you can achieve that scale is the compactness of urbanization, right? So you put in power systems and sewer and all of that and share that in a much greater efficiency. So that's what hyper urbanization. And we get excited about mega cities, 10 million plus people. We're going to be moving to, what they call kind of megatropolis kind of thing with 100 million people. And Beijing is already forming that structure in Canada. Lagos, Nigeria will be another. So this is what we mean by hyper urbanization.
So we're already seeing stresses on food and resources scarcity today.
Yeah.
I can imagine this sort of population growth that's just going to add to that.
It's going to put a stress on food. It's going to put a stress on water. And if we don't learn to kind of live in a sustainable way, and I'm putting that mostly on the developed countries that overconsume. We can't sustain 2 billion more people, right? So, but we also can't do what we've been doing over right now and say, oh, that's going to satisfy us in the future, because it won't. I mean, our farming practices on this planet are essentially what they were since the dawn of man, right? But in the future, we're going to have hydroponic and aeroponic towers and robotics and other technology to create proteins, manufacture proteins rather than having livestock. So all of those technologies will evolve to meet the demand and preserve life. Right?
So we've heard a lot about climate migration. People are typically talking about folks from large countries are moving to another country. Is urban, this hyper urbanization, is that also climate migration?
I mean, to some extent, people will migrate to find housing, but I think in general, migration is driven, as we're seeing already in Sri Lanka and elsewhere, Peru, and people that are now protesting and upset because they don't have access to food or whatever resources they may need. So when you think about countries that lack resources, especially water, which is an existential threat to a person in like 3 days, or food, which is more like 30 days, then they're going to move and try to find water and food and survival, right? So I think those are the greater forces that'll drive migration, is the ability for people to survive on the plot of land where they are. And those cities will be the golden promise for survival and jobs.
So that's a great segue to our next question, which is around, how, so if you look at World Trade Center Institute's network today, it's made up of more than 5,000 global business leaders who are driving global business, but also global good. And when we think of the global good piece, it's largely about environmental sustainability. So to that end, what trends are you seeing related to climate change and resource scarcity?
Well, that's another big topic. So let's start with probably the number one issue for the world as far as sustainability is energy consumption, right? And right, what powered the essentially the second industrial revolution was oil, right? And so we've been just vastly consuming and emitting greenhouse gas emissions ever since, right? So the big and I think this whole kind of Russian war with Ukraine and everything is really accelerating some of these major changes that were envisioned to being years out now are like literally weeks out, with changes that are going on. But one of them will be this reduction in dependence on oil and gas, right? And is it going to happen in month or year? No, but it's going to be accelerated through solar, wind, nuclear, fuel cell and hydrogen, type fuel to lessen that footprint from energy. And actually, buildings and agriculture are probably the biggest consumers of energy or generation of greenhouse gas. And so if the technology can shift on both of those fronts, we can make a significant dent
And how can businesses minimize the impact of these threats on their operations?
Yeah, businesses need to, companies do 2 or 3 year plans, right? Well, they need to do like strategic plan. It says, what's my long-term survivability profile, right? And look at these things. So if I'm a big energy consumer, then I should start, every year systematically taking a chunk and moving it to, a sustainable energy source, right? Whatever is appropriate for my business. If I'm a big water consumer, right, I should be looking and say, how do I manage that? How do I recycle, in manufacturing? Or if my product, like, a soft drink or something is largely water, then how am I going to sustain that? Maybe not necessarily where I'm working, but broadly within the community that I'm servicing and selling that product to. Those are the kinds of things that companies really need to look at, and they need to look at diversity in their supply and not rely on one or two suppliers that are half the world away. But what about in your own backyard?
That's a great point.
And not one or the other, we not necessarily have to pick sides, but lower your product, your sourcing in one region and raise it in another, and have at least diversity of supply.
Are there technology advancements that businesses should be aware of today?
For sustainability?
Yeah, that would help on this environmental front.
I think, the one common denominator for every business, and the buildings are largely the major consumer of energy, would be, more efficient heating and cooling. And of course, the production of that energy, those should be the highest priorities. Then it really comes down to the business. What are you doing? If your job is to slaughter chickens or cows or beef, and well, do we really need to do that anymore? Can you start to shift your production of packaged protein to, like Beyond Meats and those kinds of things, and get away from that? And you're going to solve a lot of global issues, as well as your long-term viability, by changing your model of not necessarily what you're producing, protein for people's consumption, but what the source of that protein is.
We're doing some of that right here in Maryland, which is very exciting.
Yeah.
So Bruce, you have a lot of experience in tracking and assessing how to deal with geopolitical issues that could impact global business. And one of those issues, we're seeing a global consensus today and is shifting. We're seeing fragmentation between nation state blocks increasing. Do you think businesses need to choose one sphere over another to engage in? And for example, let's look at the Russia's war in Ukraine right now, and this crisis. Many companies voluntarily pulled out because of Russia, because of this issues. Is there a chance of separate or parallel economies here?
So let's take the easy one. Companies are pulling out of Russia because they know it will be a long time before Russia is back as part of the international community, right? Along with the sanctions and things that they're having to deal with. So it's a tough choice, especially for energy companies that left billions of dollars on the table. But one that's like, well, when this is not going to recover in any short period of time. So that was that decision. But as far as the kind of world order, I would say that everyone is very much seeing that we're going to end up with kind of Team China and Team West, right? And those, will become kind of economic systems. So they'll have currency, including, cryptocurrencies, and they're going to have trading rules, and they'll have tariffs. And so, yes, I think companies very much in the not too distant future are going to have to deal with two international trading systems, and dealing with multiple currencies and currency, hedging and those kinds of things are going to be a normal course of business for companies in that new world order. Now, is it going to be just bipolar? I think the whole, kind of, crypto blockchain technology evolution, especially with the metaverse and all the things that are evolving, we could end up with a very, very localized and fragmented, but coordinated and interconnected economic systems all over the globe. That could be a possible future.
It already seems like supply chain and some of these global trends are complicated. But what you just described, the complexity of that and the decision making at the helm of some of these companies will be enormous decisions.
Yeah, it will. And I think it's more of when we look at alternative futures, when you look at these, kind of 5 mega trend areas and say, well, how do they interrelate to each other and how might they evolve? One of the evolutions is this distributed kind of self-sufficiency, so you can almost think of every small town having its own integral capabilities for power, for food, for policing, for, those kinds of things. They could have their own currency, right? And then interaction of different communities for different, trades and resources. So that's one, possible outcome, probably not in my lifetime, but this multipolar outcome where the decoupling or the deglobalization is underway.
And how should businesses and business leaders prioritize these mega trends and geopolitical issues? Should they take a holistic approach to dealing with them?
Well, they have to take a holistic approach because, each one impacts the other, right? It's the same as where we were in the 1800s with the Industrial Revolution. And, why do we have, we had 1 billion people on this planet for the entire human history, roughly 12,000 years, 1 billion. And then after the Industrial Revolution 1 and 2, we added 6, almost 7 billion more people. Why? Because we had the technology, steam, and then ultimately hydrocarbon, energy to produce more food and more cake. And so we flourished, right? There's nothing that says that as technology evolves in the next decades, that we don't create this technological metaverse universe that, we populate the planet with another 7 billion people, right? But in the current model of, we're exhausting that model. So, population's going to top out and probably, go negative, growth wise. So, those are the things. So companies need to say, okay, on this trajectory, this is our plan. And on this trajectory, this is how we should view it. And it's the same with climate change. And if we get, 3 to 5 meter rise in sea level, what does that mean? Like, where are your facilities? Where are your people? What happens when, 800 million housing units disappear over the next 50 years? So they should really think through and how their business would react to those future states, and then say, okay, what do we need to be doing now to optimize year to year to year to year as we march that way to make those adjustments. And that's what strategic planning for these types of trends would do versus a 2 or 3 year very short window.
So looking back at your last role, which was CEO of also another large global risk assessment company, multiple offices around the world, put yourself back in this seat again. Each of these trends and issues will inevitably impact personnel. So coming off of the pandemic, we learned all about some of the efficiencies of workforce strategies and tactics. How do leaders prepare their workforces? How do they think about the workforce of the future? Do benefits need to be, thought about again? Recruitment strategies? How do you think about the personnel component?
People always ask me, like, where do I see the major transformation in companies in the future? And I always tell them human resources. And they're like, what? Why isn't it IT or supply chain? Right? So because they're there, they're going to adapt to the change, and just like they have from, floppy disks to cloud, right? They'll deal with that. But person, the people assets of a company, and how you're going to manage that on a global scale, right? Because it's going to become more important about where you go and find the best people anywhere, not in your backyard. And that comes back to that concept about these remote tools and stuff. No, it's actually going to be, I'm going to bring people together in a collaborative, immersive, virtual environment to accomplish the work that needs to be done, whether it's managing a factory, whether it's a strategic planning meeting, whether it's teaching, because with the technology that's evolving, it's only a few short years ahead of us. We will be sitting here fully articulated with digital twins, having this conversation as if we were literally sitting in the same room, seeing your expressions, seeing my full body motion, everything that I'm doing right now, but I would not be present. And it would be virtually indistinguishable of whether we were sitting in Baltimore or you're in Jakarta and I'm in Lagos.
Fascinating.
Right.
Fascinating.
And so that's why, and the people resources, I mean, the developing countries, China, the US, Japan's been living with this, their populations are not growing, and they're not growing enough to meet their GDP. So those countries are going to be forced to go find talent. Where's the youth? The youth is in Africa. The youth is in Southeast Asia, and Latin America to some extent. But that's where the human resources will be, and bring them into your organization through this immersive technology. And that's what this whole metaverse and all this kind of stuff is about. And it's a very powerful model. And I can create 24/7 business operations. The whole nature of a workday and those kinds of things just kind of fade away in this like global continuous operation model of just using resources geographically around the globe. Right?
Wow, fascinating, Bruce. I know we have challenges today as leaders. That will be a fascinating one to tackle.
And while we're on the HR, I'll just finish this one because it's one that when I talk to HR organizations and I say, you have to adopt ownership of that asset and be just like supply chain has responsibility or global asset protection or sites and facilities. You have to own the people asset, right? And just like your company has a customer relationship management system to manage a customer for life and all the aspects and interfaces and history with that customer, the HR department needs to have a people relationship management system and know everything longitudinally over time of my relationship with the company and what benefits and what education and what's my next step and what do I need and what challenges do I have and what other wellness issues, whether it's physical, mental, financial, all of that should be known to create that one-to-one relationship with every employee to keep them for life.
And
so that's my pitch.
I love it. And it's also making me think about, the traditional business leader is going to put on the hat and equate that to customer lifetime value, really digging into what that value is, the employee lifetime value. And obviously the equation has to work mutually.
And the nurturing and motivating of that person and training them. So companies are going to be much more involved in continuous skill training and certification than they are now by orders of magnitude.
That's fascinating. We've covered a lot of heavy issues today, and I will say I've inspired already by some of your thoughts. But can you leave us on a solid, positive note? What is giving you what's making you optimistic today?
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of the briefings I get, they call me Dr. Doom. So I'm trying to be a little bit more balanced in, what are the positive opportunities. But, I am always amazed and optimistic about, humankind's ability to, deal with a problem and come up with solutions. I don't care whether it was, pre-industrial, whether it was industrial, whether it's technology, whether it's, the future, right? That incredibly creative and inventive to solve problems. And we've talked a lot about that today. The biggest threat, when you think about existential threats for mankind, clearly, climate change is up there. WMD, weapons of mass destruction, is there too, right? As is an asteroid or a EMP pulse from the sun, right? So, but at least for those things that we can control, I feel like, if we could retool our global governance structure, which is failing us as we speak, would be a major problem that needs a solution. And this current, world situation with Russia and Ukraine creates some energy to actually go at that. But so that's, one. The other is when we think about resources and supply and distant, globalization and all this kind of stuff, we often overlook our own backyard. And when you look and say, well, if we had like a EU of the Americas, the United Federation of the Americas, and created an economic bloc of North and South America, you would step back and go, that would be incredible. I mean, roughly over 1 billion people, so on par with China and India, right? We have, 8 times the GDP per capita of China. We have, unprecedented education, innovation, technology, resources, but also natural resources. When you think about South America, the minerals and forests and all of the resources that we have at our doorstep. And by bringing this all together into an economic engine and block, continuous growing season, right, from North and South Hemisphere. I mean, all these benefits, and that would also accrue to us. Why would people leave their countries and come here for jobs if they had great jobs there, right? So, and youth and resources. So we could create an economic block right here in our backyard to create that diversity in supply of both human and natural resources. And we have 2 wonderful oceans protecting us, which has always been a strategic benefit, and do well. And so those would be some of the things that I think are great opportunities, along with all the other things that I've talked about, that we can really change the dynamic of how we live and thrive on this planet.
Well, Bruce, that was a lot of optimism to end on, and I love this opportunity that you talk about the American Federation of the Americas. Thank you for spending time with me today.
Pleasure.
It was always a pleasure to talk to you about these big mega trends. And if business leaders want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, it's McIndoe riskadvisory.com. As long as you don't get tired typing it in, I'm here.
All right. Excellent. Thank you so much.
Take care.